It is my pleasure to introduce the first panel discussing the current DoD policy environment, moderated by Dr. Sidra Montgomery.
All right, good morning. Okay, mic check. We are good, right? All right, excellent. Well, good morning. My name is Sidra Montgomery. I'm a sociologist and researcher who's spent the past decade conducting policy-relevant research to help make the military a better place for its people. I'm honored to be here today, moderating the DoD Policy Environment panel with this esteemed group. We collectively agreed ahead of time that I would provide the disclaimer for the whole group for the sake of efficiency. So for each panelist, the views and opinions presented or discussed here today are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent the views of DHS or DoD and its components. Appearance of or any reference to commercial products or services does not constitute DHS or DoD endorsement of those products or services. So now I'd like to have each panelist provide a brief introduction of themselves, including their name and brief information on your background.
Good morning, everyone. Marlene Ranjitsingh. I am a Navy officer, formerly program manager of the Navy Women's Initiatives team in the Navy Office of Women's Policy. So that's what I've done in my reserve career. I'm an intel officer by trade. I've worked with many DIA and ONI units, and then as a civilian, I work for DIA.
Sam Sliney. I just transitioned off of active duty last April. I was a Air Force JAG for about 10 and a half years, transitioned out of a Air Force Special Operations Unit as their operational legal advisor. I now serve in the New Jersey Air National Guard, still a JAG, recovering attorney though as a civilian because I now do public policy work full-time for the Department of Defense in the Defense State Liaison Office, which is where I serve as the liaison between DoD and the state legislatures and what the state legislatures and executive branches can do to benefit the military community in their states. Also relevant, I'm a military spouse, married to an Army Green Beret who's been serving for the last 20 years, primarily within the, out of Fort Bragg, if that's what we're calling it today, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Where we've lived for the better part of the last decade. I had 3 kids on active duty. They are all under the age of 6, all born at Womack Army Medical Hospital. So I tell folks that my entire adult experience has been in some way connected to the Department of Defense in one way or the other. And that kind of drives my opinions. And then I'm also the former co-chair of the Women's Initiative team for the Department of the Air Force that was dismantled about a month and a half ago.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Sutcliff. I'm a Marine Corps officer with just under 16 years of service. I'm currently stationed in Okinawa, Japan, overseas, but I've held billets at the tactical level, assigned to a Marine Expeditionary Unit up to the operational level at U.S. Indo-PACOM Command and U.S. Strategic Command.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm not an officer. My name is Senior Chief Amy Halperin. I'm in the Coast Guard. I'm currently stationed at Coast Guard Officer Candidate School as a senior enlisted leader. Previous tours as the Maritime Law Enforcement and Maritime Alien Interdiction Operations Advisor to Coast Guard District 11 Commander. Before that, I was Tactical Law Enforcement Team Pacific, deploying down to Ecuador, Colombia, doing counter-drug, counter-migrant operations, and very excited to be here, and hopefully can bring some DHS perspective to the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we've got some questions for the panelists, but we'll also have time for questions at the end, so please think about what questions are bubbling up as you're listening to the conversation. And before we begin with our panel discussion, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the rapid changes and the dramatic shifts that we've seen in the defense policy landscape over the past month and a half. And I also want to just state the obvious, right? There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty right now. The speed, the volume, the direction of these changes, it feels like a markedly different moment than we've experienced in the recent past. But that's exactly why this symposium is so important. We must continue having these conversations even when the structures and the contours of the DoD policy environment have shifted. Yet in all of this change, there's one very important thing that has not changed. And that's that women are an essential part of the equation for military lethality. A strong US military, one that protects our national security and is ready to fight enemies, foreign and domestic, cannot exist without women. Women are not a nice to have in today's military, they're a need to have, they're a must have. And that's why ensuring their readiness to execute the mission is vital and must be a non-negotiable for the Defense Department. If we don't have policies that support and ensure women's highest and most optimal performance, we're losing. We're losing to our own internal mechanisms. We're losing out on maximizing the talent that we already have, and we won't be able to fully capitalize on everything that our future talent has in store for us. So with that, I'd like to open our discussion with a broad question. What's the biggest opportunity that we have right now to better support military women as assets in the US military's readiness and lethality? Anyone feel free to open it up.
So I think the biggest opportunity is ourselves, right? Those who are actually still serving, and even those that are not, right? We still have the opportunity to impact those that are around us and those that serve, whether it's mentorship, whether it's leadership, whether it's just serving as a friend, right? Whether it's giving guidance and or direction. I still think that we are our biggest opportunity. We can get out there, right, and encourage, right? And for some, in some roles, right, you have the authority to do certain things, right, and help all military personnel overall. So that's just my opinion. I feel like, we're the biggest opportunity. We can still get out there and make a difference despite the changes that are ongoing.
I think the biggest opportunity we have is to learn from those that are in current leadership and how they think and they view the world. We already know that that's very different, and they may or may not have a misunderstanding of what it is that we've been doing over the last decade. As we've seen some of the rollbacks of the programs related to, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and unfortunately readiness kind of being overshadowed by that. So I think there's a vast opportunity to educate. I also strongly and firmly believe that women rise to the occasion when they are challenged, and we are certainly being challenged right now. So we may not do things, over the last 4 to 5 years, we saw the advent of the Women's Initiatives team, starting with the Air Force, then with the Army, then with the Navy, and we don't have those anymore. But that doesn't mean we still can't do the work. We may be doing the work in different ways. We may be using different language, and I think we have an opportunity to learn, how our senior leaders now view the world and what language we need to use to appeal to them. From somebody who does policy work, my biggest skill set is learning how to speak the language of those I'm trying to appeal to. And I strongly believe in our current DoD leadership has made comments that lethality is at the very forefront of their mind. And so we just have to figure out a way to make them see and understand what it is that we are doing and why it is value added to lethality. Because we all know that. We already have buy-in, right? It's getting that buy-in from them and making them understand what it is we're really trying to do. And we all know that it's readiness. We all know it's lethality. So I think we have a vast opportunity to learn a lot, and then to potentially develop some different skill sets when we're doing this type of policy change work.
That's a great point. Actually, to add on to both of your points from Marlene and Sam, I think mentorship and leadership development is a key opportunity for us, whether it be formal or informal. I know that there were various initiatives to formalize mentorship programs, and we can still do that. We can still do it formally, we can still do it informally, but I think especially when women are pursuing roles, whether they be combat roles or roles previously not, performed by women, may have fewer access points to the experience, the guidance, that's necessary for them to continue on to various career paths of their choosing. So I think whether it's formalized, informalized, mentorship is a big way that we can break down barriers and provide opportunities for our female service members.
Yeah, I think that when we look back in history, we can not so long ago see, the women and men who were butting up against these very same issues. And I think that it's very important for us to not give up. It's easy to lead when things are going well, and it's easy to do the mentoring when the problems don't seem so overwhelming. But now is the time to stand up and be that example. And it doesn't matter what's on your collar. Anyone can lead. And I think mentorship, both formal and informal, those things are incredibly important. And taking care of our people, those. Something I tell my students is when you see a chief, they've got 1,000 arrows in their back. And it's up to us now to stand up and protect people, create spaces for them to still learn and grow, so that they see someone like them. When I was a young ME3 coming into the service and I saw the one and only female senior chief maritime enforcement specialist, that I didn't see another one for like years after that. She was my shining example for all those years until I was sitting here today, and now I'm the only one in the rating. So it's really up to us to create that space for people to grow and continue fighting.
Great, thank you all. So I want to pull on kind of a thread that Sam had mentioned, right? There's been so much work, particularly in the past 10 to 15 years, obviously beyond that as well in the past. So I want to talk about, sort of what has been working and dissect some of the reasons how it's impacted women in the military. So in your opinion, what have been some of the most impactful policy, program, or resource changes for military women in recent years? And how have those changes contributed to recruitment, readiness, retention, and lethality for military women?
So I'll start from the Air Force perspective. I think one of the largest changes that we've had in the recent past is what we called flying while pregnant. So, right, we have the preponderance of the aviators in the DoD, and prior to 2019, if you were an aviator and you became pregnant with a positive blood pregnancy test, you automatically went down or DNIF and could not fly, regardless of if you were a mobility aircraft pilot or our CAF combat, so our fighters and bombers. Over time, we saw that shift to where it went from a no because to a yes but. So where we found ourselves in 2022 was that, you do still go to NIF at the beginning of the pregnancy, but there is a process to request a waiver where you could legitimately fly through all trimesters if you have are not in a high-risk pregnancy and are healthy. The reason that we did this and why it's had such an impact in the Air Force is we know we have a pilot shortage. The Air Force has had a pilot shortage for over a decade. It has always been something at the forefront of our Chief of Staff of the Air Force's mind. We are still dealing with it today. Women make up 6% of Air Force pilots, 2% of our fighter bomber pilots. And so when they're DNIF or down for 9+ months, especially if it's early on in their career, it impacts their qualifications, it impacts their ability to catch up. And then once they do come back, they have to work twice as hard. Oh, by the way, they're also in the 4th trimester. They have to work twice as hard to pick up and get to where their male counterparts are at, who don't have to necessarily navigate that part of life. So we now have it to where they can, we're not sending women off on deployments, pregnant, we're not to that point, but they are able to do training missions. They are able to stay qualified if they choose. That's another big part of it. Is in the calculus, we did not want females to feel like they had to fly if they didn't feel like that's what was safe for them to do. So there is choice embedded into that. But it gives them options. It gives them choices, whereas before they were just told, yeah, no, you're not flying. And a lot of it was based on fear. It was the unknown. We did not know how it was going to impact a fetus, which I thought was, I am not an aviator. I found absolutely fascinating as we were having these conversations because I flew with my first pregnancy in a commercial aircraft till I was like 37 weeks pregnant. No one ever batted an eye. So the fact, and when I say air crew, we're talking the pilots and we're talking the backseaters that we have. So I found it absolutely fascinating that we were making this huge deal over people flying when I was like, oh, I did that and no one batted an eye. So for us, that we've seen a huge impact on our readiness and our retention of women because of that singular effort.
Great. What other impactful policy, program, or resource changes do you all feel like have been in recent years, and how have they improved things for military women?
I'll say from the Marine Corps perspective, the force integration policy, so this is not necessarily recent, going almost a decade ago at this point, when the Marine Corps opened up combat arms MOSs to women. Talk about impactful though, that was huge because now the Marine Corps put an intensive effort into determining what the actual requirements were for various combat MOS execution, whether it's infantry, tanks, AAVs, engineered, you name it. So rather than focusing on, whether you're male or female, it's now demonstrated capability. So I talk about why that is so impactful in that finally there's transparency on what the standard is, first of all, and then second of all, it enables the most qualified men and women to be able to compete and hold those billets. So I think in terms of, giving the most qualified people the ability to choose the career path that they want to pursue, that was hugely impactful. It doesn't mean the work is over though, because as they release the policy, there's of course the acknowledgement that, we need to look at the impact on physiological differences between men and women. We need to continue to look at gear, equipment fit, and supply of that equipment. Impacts to unit cohesion, all sorts of things that are still work to be done, but that was sort of a landmark thing for the Marine Corps and something that we're still pursuing, so a good thing. Yep.
I'll add two things. One of the reasons I joined the Coast Guard was because we never had any blockage for women joining the combat arms ratings in the Coast Guard. And back in 2007, when I was looking at joining the military, had a very frank conversation with my dad, which was like, you're gonna go right to Fallujah if you go be an MP in the Army. Please, take a look at what this looks like right now. And still ended up making that decision and going into maritime law enforcement in the Coast Guard. But one of the biggest things, the biggest positives that I've seen is, I would say probably about 7 or maybe 8 years ago, the Coast Guard established a Women Afloat coordinator. And that person is outside of the assignment process, and their job is just to manage the integration of women onto ships, which happened fairly recently, right, within the last 15 or 20 years, depending on which ship and how quickly they were able to integrate women onto it. And that person is really, their whole job is to maintain the health of women continuing to be able to integrate onto ships and working with the detailers to establish policy that, hey, if we have 4 of the same ship type and we have a woman going here and a woman going over here, can we just swap these bullet numbers and put 2 women in the stateroom, and then we're good to go. So, and then that sort of paved the way for, it used to be if you got pregnant, if you were going to be or a single mother, you could not earn assignment to a ship, and that policy has gone away. And there's a lot more supportive policy around, okay, how do we get this we have sea time requirements to advance, so how do we get these women what they need professionally while also allowing them to take care of their family in the ways that they need to. So I think we've come quite a long way, and we've been very forward-leaning in the Coast Guard, so I'm very grateful for that.
Excellent.
So one of the areas in the Navy is in our special warfare area where women are able to apply to be a SEAL, right, to run through the program. As mentioned previously, there's still a lot of challenges, equipment, fitting, things like that. We've come a long way. In my work with the Navy WIT, I still think we have a long way to go, but, slow and steady wins the race, so.
Yeah. So what challenges and gaps exist for women in the military, and how could policy updates or policy changes provide better support? I know that's a big, broad question. Your brain goes a million places. Like, where do I even start?
Which gap?
Yeah.
Which gap do you want to talk about?
I think that the biggest gap that I still see is female, what we would call, internal to the Air Force, female specialized healthcare. And this is a huge issue nationally, which I think disproportionately impacts us. Right? We have bases in the Air Force, Cannon Air Force Base. If you don't know where that's at or never been there, it's middle of nowhere, New Mexico. The nearest airport's like an hour and a half away, and then you drive an hour and a half into the desert, and you arrive. They had they could not get any women's health care providers at the installation. They had one OBGYN in the local community who then retired, and then people were having to drive an hour and a half to go to Lubbock, Texas, for care. So we have not cracked the nut on that. Access to providers, pelvic floor physical therapy. I'm dealing with that right now, where I live. I got a TRICARE referral to pelvic floor physical therapy as a preventative measure during pregnancy, and TRICARE referred me to a normal physical therapist. And when I called to make an appointment, I was like, "Are you a pelvic floor PT?" And they're like, "Well, no, but I've had some classes." Like, okay, no, thank you. You're not touching me. And when you call TRICARE, they're like, "Oh, well, they're in our database," right? Like, that's all frustrating. That's time. But also where I live is rural North Carolina. Like, there's just not a lot of providers there. There's not a lot of pelvic floor physical therapists, generally speaking, across the United States. And then also the lack of research for women in the health. Like, we know that the IRB would not approve research for women that were in childbearing years. And oh, by the way, childbearing years is like age 18 to 42. Like, they would not study women in that range for decades. That has since went away. But we also know the medical community moves slowly when it comes to research. They're very methodical. And so we have that gap. We haven't caught up to where we have the research we need to inform that care. And I think we're still plugging through that, and it's very frustrating for us, for the people who are in it and trying to navigate it. But I have seen progress, and I do think that progress hopefully will continue, and that those funding streams won't be stopped, and that we will continue to do that type of research so that we can get a better medical infrastructure to support our female warfighters.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree, and I'll also add, from my own experiences being overseas in Japan, like also similar issues with having the right people sent out there to be able to provide the medical support. That's always been a challenge, and I've heard many similar stories for the Marines that I work with as well, with those same challenges. And then I would offer another subset of female-specific health concerns. Menstrual cycle, menstruation. I think we're dipping our toes into better understanding that, but there's still so much that needs to be, I think, educated for female service members, but also their chains of command, their leadership. Medical providers understanding what conditions exist, how to best support, how can we get better access to supplies, hygiene for field and deployed environments. I could go on, but that's something that I think still exists as a gap. It's a natural process, and yet there's still somewhat stigmatized, I think, especially in the Marine Corps from my observations. And so we need to be able to talk about it as a normal process. We need to be able to be there for those that we lead who may be having challenges, and we need to have the right medical care from our providers to be able to support those challenges too.
So I concur with both previous statements. The biggest thing for me is the education piece, because you can have the policy, right? But if you don't have the education piece, the policy sometimes can go flat, right? Education is huge in all areas, and it was one of the things that we decided to really try to focus on and collaborate with training centers on, training from all aspects, because we can talk about these things, but if our male counterparts don't understand it, how do you implement something you don't understand? And some would say it's ignorance. Some of it is, but some of it is also, hey, making sure they get the right information, making sure they're informed about these things, about women's experiences. And I'm going to say it again, women's experiences, They're not challenges, they're not problems, they are women's experiences. Being educated about that so you understand that. So as a leader, you're able to make better decisions when you're educated, just like in any other area.
Yeah, and I'll add a little kind of sidebar to this. Is I'm going to talk specifically about special operations in the Coast Guard. So in the Coast Guard, you don't just go into special operations and stay there. You can come out. But when you go back in, you have to go back through a selection process. So that's something I'm looking at now, where I went through selection as like a 28-year-old spry young lady, and now I'm nearly 40 years old, and looking at perimenopause in the next couple of years and things like that, and how is going through selection going to impact that? Am I going to have the supplementation I need, the nutrition? Like, I'll get my body there. Don't worry about that. It's the supportive care that goes into, like, I'm still ready to do the mission. I'm still here, and I just need the supportive care to get there. And we don't really have those mechanisms. And then another kind of sidebar to that is a little sea story. When I was going through selection the first time, the Coast Guard carried the SIG P229. If you've ever seen that pistol before, it is huge. And the pistol grip of it is like the size of a water bottle. And I made a simple request to change my pistol grips out because my hands are small. And I was told, no, that you cannot do that. That is against policy. You can't manipulate the weapon. And it would impact my ability to qualify at the score that I knew I could get because I carried and had other weapon systems personally. But my service weapon was so big and so clunky that it was very difficult, and I had to do all kinds of extras. I'm like spraying like spray deodorant on my hands so my hands stay dry and things like that. Something as simple as like, I'm going to take these 2 pieces of plastic off and put smaller ones on. And that was a completely ridiculous request to make at the time. Now we've kind of figured out that other people have small hands too, not just 5'2" women, that there are men that have this issue too. And so we've updated our systems, our weapon systems, but that was something I just didn't think was, when I was going through that I would be having that conversation. Like, of course you can switch those out so that you can do your job well. What if I have to engage a target and now we're going down a path we don't want to go down. So, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and I just want to hit on what Marlene talked about. Like, it's about listening to women's experiences, right? This is my experience. I know that if I could have this, different configuration, that would really improve my performance, and that's going back to that piece about understanding women's experiences and not seeing them as challenges or deficits, but just understanding them as sort of a neutral fact. So we know that, there's partners and other sort of innovative ideas out there. So what examples or lessons do you feel like we could take from our partners on policy or innovative approaches to ensuring that institutional structures in the military can better support women?
So while I was with the Navy WIT, we would meet with our 5I partners quarterly. And so some of the initiatives that I learned about was in the UK, they have something called wraparound childcare. It's an added benefit for service members that allows them after school care, as whether if they need it before the start of the day as well. They deemed that it would save each military person probably about 3,000 pounds a year. Was open to children 4 to 11 years old. If the child was disabled, they would extend that to the age of 16. And that's an enormous benefit. I mean, it's one of the things that we also struggle with now within our current services is childcare. The availability of it, the timing of it. You want us to work a 12-hour watch, you're not giving me a child care center that affords that for me. So I think that's a added benefit for them, and something we should definitely look at. But Next, we spoke with the Australians. They developed a uniform for women that's pretty much very comfortable, easy to launder, form-fitting to many women's body shapes, body types, and both their Army and their Air Force wear the same uniform. They're just different colors. They wear it year-round. Versus our services, we have, so many different uniforms, and they do have more. But, speaking from a Navy perspective, I mean, I know. Consolidation would be great. So we actually, the officer that was wearing it, she actually showed it to us, just looked really comfortable. Even better, they had it designed by one of their famous designers out there. So that makes you feel a little bit better about wearing it, I guess. And then, so that was really great. And then the Canadians are doing some research on form-fitting their ships out for, ensuring that their ships are tailored to women, right? Not just to men. So not here's a ship, you figure out what to do with it, you work around it, but really doing some studies and some focus groups about the messing, the birthing, and not only from a mental standpoint, but from a physicality standpoint as well, right? Morale, right? You're out to sea 6 months, 8 months, however long sometimes, and it's a challenge, right? But making sure if you have an environment where you're mentally comfortable, you're physically safe, that makes the entire experience better. And oh, by the way, that makes your retention better, because then I'm more likely to stay on, right, when you are, providing, these amenities to me. So just some really interesting conversations. It was great talking with them. It was great hearing about the ideas. Collaboration is great, because you can also take that back and implement a lot of those as well. So yeah, it was, and it's also interesting, like, things that they value. So New Zealand created a whole new parental support guide for new parents. What they found in studies were that military parents did not feel supported. So they created this extensive guide for them, and it has so much information, anything from uniforms to filling out documents to getting services, and just really supporting them as a military parent, which I think is important as well. You'll see that, especially in the Navy, a lot of women get out, mostly when they start hitting the years where they can't bear children anymore, right? If you had those services, if you provided those amenities to them, their retention would be a lot better. So
We leveraged, well, first of all, I think partners means a lot of things. I think we all have to partner better. The one thing that drives me insane about the DoD is how stovepiped the services are. I know for the WITS, right, the Women's Initiative Team, we had a joint monthly meeting where we shared information. It was totally unofficial. I'm not even sure if it was sanctioned by anyone that's important. I literally just met people and was like, hey, we're going to meet and get after these problems. But we shared information because we found that, like, we were all working on very similar problems, and some of us had already, like, solved the problem to the uniform. The Air Force has recently redid its maternity service dress. Thank goodness, because that moo-moo is just awful. It's in manufacturing now, but, like, I would wear it to joint events. We had pilots, we'd wear it at joint events. But when I went to, like, uniform fitting events, they are now doing those jointly. So, like, at Fort Bragg when I would go, they would have anybody could come and look at it. And they had representatives from each of the service uniform offices there, so that they were actually now sharing information, so that we aren't stovepiped and saying, well, the Navy looks this way, the Air Force looks this way, because really it's just the color of our uniforms that differ, and how we wear our ribbons and accoutrements and things like that. But partnering with each other better, and sharing information, because we just don't do that well. I don't know why. A lot of people will say it's because of service culture. Like, every service, you have to preserve your culture, but I do believe there's a way to do that. Still, honor your service culture, but still learn from one another. We do it with equipment development. The Army's doing a lot with plate development, contour plate development, and thankfully in the SOF community, they are partnering across the SOF community on that RTD&E at the SOCOM level. So I think that's positive. Partnerships internationally. So when we did the hair policy change in the Air Force, which garnered a lot of media attention, and I'll give a shout out to the Navy because I'm pretty sure the Navy allowed ponytails before we did. But we did it. We used a lot of our international partners that they allowed. Like, hey, we deploy jointly, we deploy internationally, like, you know, the Brits, the Kiwis, they wear ponytails, like, and it doesn't impact their ability to shoot a gun. Matter of fact, their helmet fits better since they can wear a ponytail. So we use those examples to help convince our leaders over a span of 5 years that they should expand our hair policy. Another really interesting story, kind of the reverse of that, was we had an Australian pilot that was in one of our developmental education programs here in the U.S., and she was going to England for an air show, and she was pregnant. And she didn't think she was going to be able to participate. She didn't have a flight suit. She didn't have a flight suit because they don't have maternity flight suits. Well, the Air Force has them. We developed them in 2021. And so we were able to work through the Foreign Disclosure Office at the secretariat level to actually get her one of those. And she wore it. She wore an American maternity flight suit in England as a Australian pilot, which is just, that's amazing, right? And how did that start? Literally someone that I know that was with her in class sent me a Facebook message and was like, Sam, do you know how to make this happen? And I was like, I don't have a clue, but we can figure it out.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the good news stories, and we have to keep doing that. On the Air and the Army National Guard side, for those that don't know, they have a state partnership program where the states partner with specific countries. Like New Jersey, my state, we partner with Albania and Cyprus. Super critical because we go over and we are embedded with those countries and we learn from one another. In the Ukraine war, it's a great anecdote because California was Ukraine's partner, and there were times at the very onset of the conflict or the invasion where the Ukrainian military lead was actually communicating over signal chat with the TAG, the Adjutant General in California, and that's literally how the U.S. was communicating with Ukraine. So leaning into those partnerships and capitalizing on information that's already out there and understanding that most of the time it doesn't require recreating the wheel. Like somebody's probably already figured it out somewhere, you just have to get connected with them.
And so before we, I don't know if my mic is on. There it is. Okay. So before we open it up to audience Q&A, I want to think and focus on like how can we actually effectuate change? So what are the most effective avenues and pathways for policy change in DoD and the military services? And then I also want to tack on something else to that, which is how can service members like yourself contribute to supporting and advancing policy change?
I'll take that one first. So one of the most effective ways I've seen policy changes happen is I think sometimes we look at these things like, I got to get this up to the highest levels of the service so that they can make this giant change. I'll give you an example of the reverse. When I was the command senior chief for District 11 staff, we changed our urinalysis policy so that the person going into the stall didn't have another person like right on top of them while they were using the bathroom or giving their sample. And the policy essentially was revolving around, modesty and giving people, one, trust and space. And we used the old COVID thermometers, the laser ones, to then test the sample, right? And so there's that whole change happened from another chief just put this document together, they routed it through legal, and then the district commander signed off on it, and now it's something that's actually rolling uphill to hopefully change the way that we do that process, because there's, in our minds when we were looking at this, is like, it seems kind of unnecessary. We're not really giving people the dignity and trust that they deserve as service members. And sure, we're going to have folks that do things that they're not supposed to do, but they're going to do that anyways. So we can potentially remove this barrier. And, I think looking at things from the local level and leveraging your communities in smaller arenas and using those smaller changes to then accompany a policy change like that with a white paper, and then routing that up like, hey, here's all the facts. Use your authority and discretion to push this forward, but this is something that's already working, and show that it's already working, and then, push it forward that way.
Well, I used to have a good answer to this. And I don't know the answer right now, given the current landscape, because I think how we've done things over the last 5 years are not going to work. And most of my work has been at the departmental and secretariat level and the DoD level. So I think, unfortunately, we're in a place where we have to let the dust settle from a lot of the changes that are happening, because I'm a firm believer in understanding your strategic environment, and I'm not personally quite sure I understand our strategic environment right now. And because of that, I can't be an effective advocate at the highest levels. We have a lot of political appointees who've not been Senate confirmed and in their seats. And I also mentioned that I'm a firm believer in understanding the audience that you're trying to appeal to. So I'm not sure we have a mechanism like we have in the past to elevate these types of issues. And unfortunately, the answer just might be, as much as it pains me to say, to let the dust settle and see where we're at in 3 to 4 months. That's not a satisfying answer, but sometimes that is the answer. And so that's kind of, where I'm at. But that doesn't stop the local level. Elevating problems, I encourage anybody to keep elevating problems. I still have projects I'm working personally, but there's just not those formalized mechanisms anymore. So I think it's going to be a wait-and-see game, unfortunately, at least for the next 6 months or so. And then we can regroup and figure out the best way to go about some of this stuff strategically.
So yeah, I agree with you, Sam. But I also say, when you elevate the problem, elevate a solution with it, right? I think I talked a little bit about this before, but also, educate, right? It doesn't have to be you bring in 50 people and sit them in a classroom. Informal education works great. We all do it if you're a parent, if you're a friend. So continue to educate. There are those that don't feel the same as a lot of the things that are being put out now. So, and there are those that still want to learn. So find those people, educate them, empower them, give them the knowledge that they have to be better people overall.
And when you elevate a solution, make sure it's data backed.
Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
do your research. Does that take time? Yes, it takes bandwidth, but I can promise you, if you present a senior leader with a data-backed solution to a problem, I have not met one that has said no. They may say not right now, like let's figure this out, but not no outright. It's the solutions that come up like the pie in the sky, and then questions are asked, you've not red teamed it. That's when things start to kind of, fall apart, so to speak. So do your research to the extent that you can do it, which is why I think this symposium is fantastic, because the amount of research that is presented equips all of you to be able to do this work.
Great. So now I'd like to open up to audience questions. We have about 15 minutes. And I think we can field questions virtually? Question mark?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay.
Okay. If you're in the room, please speak loudly, and I'll repeat your question so we make sure the virtual audience hears it. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually don't want to be the first because I'm the oldest. So I was commissioned in 1977.
Oh, perfect. We have a mic. Great.
One of the first women, is it working?
Yeah.
To go through ROTC, Purdue University. I went to sea in 1979, one of the first women to serve on ships, and I've been one of the first women to do most of my jobs and assignments since then. And I've been on Dakowitz, and I've done all of these types of policy interventions for many, many years. I think what you've talked about this morning so far is very important. But in my view, we are in imminent danger of some extreme actions happening, like closing down some of the combatant opportunities to women. So why do I think that? You read the press, you can make your own assumptions. Who is advising SecDef right now? Who is talking to him about the thing that I did not hear very much of this morning, except for you and our renowned president of the Valkyrie Project. The Valkyrie Project. Warriors. Valkyrie is about warriors. What have you said today that says not about what you can do for me, but about what I can do for you? There was a little bit of that about how we need women, we must have women, we bring all of the things that you need, but that has got to be where we start, in my opinion, at this very important transition period, and that is the sound bites that we have got to have ready, and someone somewhere, and maybe it's the head of the Valkyrie Project, needs to get in and talk to SecDef and say, look, this isn't about pregnancy and parenting and welfare centers and breast pumps and yeah, all that stuff's important, but you cannot have a ready lethal force without us, period. And then you back it up with the data. This is, to me, we can't wait 4 months. We can't wait 6 months. I don't know how you do it. I don't know who you talk to. But it's my impression that things happen very fast in this administration. And they just don't care. If they close down SEALs tomorrow to women, there's no female SEALs. There's one girl at the Naval Academy getting ready to be commissioned and to go to SEAL school. She's the first one, in my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong. You can tell me if I'm wrong. But so they say, what do we lose? Right? What do we lose by not opening SEALs to women? What do we lose by closing some of the Marine? And believe me, at Dakowitz, I went through all of that Marine Corps stuff with them for 4 years. And I was on the Dakowitz when we recommended to open combatant positions to women. I was part of that recommendation to SecDef Ash Carter at that time. So it's just critical, I think. You have a voice, you have a platform, you have a podium to somehow get that message to where it matters. So I don't mean I'll get off my perch, and but I just feel so emotional about this. You can tell. So thank you.
I mean, I think it's a good point. I can tell you. I mean, our acting secretary. I've made requests for meetings with our acting secretary. Like, hey, I will tell him why the WIT is not DEI. Like, I have no problem standing up and explaining that. Unfortunately, given the scrutiny on general officers at the department on the secretariat level, you have GOs and even career senior executive service members who are very hesitant because they are in fear, right? They're in fear of their jobs, their livelihoods, providing for their families, and I 100% get that. So, I'm not cognizant. I agree that this administration is moving very quickly. I'm just not sure right now, given what they're focused on, they would even entertain an audience to hear about these things, right? Because it is moving so quickly. I do hope, and maybe call me an eternal optimist, that we will get that opportunity at some point. So that's when I say, like, the dust needs to settle. I think, one thing you can do right now is right the Hill, write your congressional representation and raise these issues to them. There are some of them that are taking stands on it. You have some service women who serve in both the House and the Senate that have these experiences and are very on both sides of the aisle, right? Bipartisan issues. So that's a good way to do it. But I mean, you go in the Pentagon right now, and it's just like the life has been sucked out of that place. It's really, really unfortunate. It's a very scary thing. So I do agree with your sentiments that it is a scary time, but I will also say that internal to the Department of the Air Force, so that's both the Air and the Space Force, we have not seen the rollback of any policies yet. What we have seen is a lot of performative actions of dismantling things in the name of DEI, but we have not, and we are monitoring, we have not seen the rollback of any of the policies that we've worked on, and I 100% believe that is because they have increased the readiness, of the force. And if, I don't know if Meg, I don't see her sitting there, but if Meg's in the room and can get an audience with SecDef, hey, she's got an army behind her.
We thought about it.
She's got an army behind her.
Great. Another question.
Sorry, the light is there, I can't see it.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Miles Garrett. I'm a prior anti-tank missileman in the Marine Corps, and I'm a current submarine officer. First, my sincere thanks to all 5 of you for this panel. I've learned a tremendous amount. Great job. 2 quick notes before I get to my question. This will be quick. I note that the issue of small hands might be a good communication technique to the current administration. Maybe it's a good, you might have a listening ear.
I'll keep that in mind.
That comment on not having strategic guidance was so critical. Thank you for that. I would offer to the room that in the absence of strategic guidance, the issues of pursuing justice and democracy are non-political. So if you don't have strategic guidance, I encourage everyone to pursue justice and democracy. My question, if any of you would be so kind, is could you inform me on the issue of allowing pregnant women onto submarines? We intentionally cut ourselves off from communication. I've been trapped under the polar ice for a period of weeks. We have a single medic on board who definitely does not specialize in women's medical care. The last I knew, women had to sign an agreement that they would not get pregnant before going on submarines. And to me, it's a confusing issue.
So what I would tell you is to reach out to the Navy Office of Women's Policy. I'll come back and talk to you a little bit afterwards. There's a couple of circumstances that fall within that, so I'll get you the information that you need and the office that you should contact that will be able to provide you with an answer so that you can do that.
Thank you so much. Another question. We've got a couple in the room. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for the discussion that you've all enabled here today. My name is Selda Bukasturk, and I'm technical staff at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, which is a FFRDC federally funded research development center. And I just wanted to get your guys' take on how those of us in the engineering and science space can collaborate with all of you to try to evoke some of these policy changes by way of assessing technology gaps like Jing has presented earlier, how we can go about developing prototypes and technologies that can help I'd hope improve and try to evoke some of the policy changes that would be helpful to all of you. So it's a very broad question, but if you have previous experiences before, especially given sort of the constraints that we're flying under today, how best us scientists and engineers in the room can help support all of you.
Continue doing the work that you're doing. The work that you do is important. I think as engaging with military members, not just people like us who sit on panels, but younger military members, right? Your enlisted E1, E3, they're probably your best prototypes. That's probably what I say. As far as the areas, I'm sure there are many areas, but I think you'll find that if you can get a hold of a lot of our younger military members, that's probably where a lot of the information is, from my perspective.
Don't stop doing what you're doing. I know as a federally funded research entity, you probably have a lot of uncertainty right now as well. If that funding streams go away, I hope that those entities continue the work and find other ways to partner with nonprofits or private industry, right? We know that the current administration is very big on the defense industry. So go out and find a for-profit, entity that wants to do good in the world and partner with them. And then I reiterate, kind of bolster the point of, if you feel you have a blind spot because you have not served before, reach out to any of us in this room and I can connect you with 50 test subjects who would be happy to sit down with you and tell you, what their experiences are, how they don't have boots that are fitted for a female foot, how they don't have uniforms that are fitted. We've taught plate carriers. A lot of times you will see some of these in the news, and in the Air Forces, has done this before, right? I think it was 2020, we touted that, we had solved the plate carrier problem. We had female plate carriers, and it's not a problem anymore. Come to find out, once those were tested by females in the field, it wasn't all that great, right? So it's that continual loop of making things better. And that stuff doesn't just, and I think I will also offer, strategic messaging. We know the current administration does not like putting the term woman before something. And I will tell you that when I'm doing this work, I rarely ever say, we were the women's initiative team, but I say this is an airman problem. I don't want to be a woman airman. I am an airman. Now, I am female, so I have my body. I expect you to recognize that anatomically and biologically, my body is different than a male's. But, I am a sailor. I am a soldier. Be cognizant of the words that you're using and the audience that you're talking to, right? Because contoured plates, plate carriers, boots that fit your anatomy, uniforms that fit your anatomy, that impacts all service members regardless, right? And if you're, for example, we do a lot of anthropometric data collection in the Air Force for how we retrofit, acquisition, and build airframes, right? If you are a short male or a tall male, that impacts you as well because you are, not inside of the median range of what someone normally looks like. And I think using that type of strategic messaging is going to be key through the next 4 years. And it just comes down to, right, speaking their language. You got to say it how they want to hear it.
Sorry, very quickly, I have one more.
Yeah, one more question. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Marlene O'Connor. I'm a former war zone correspondent, mostly foreign wars, and also served in the Obama administration in Afghanistan. So I worked with women in the military at that point. Just wanted to echo what Admiral Pottinger said, because in the private sector, these are the same arguments that have been used countlessly in the private sector about various reasons why women can't. But in the private sector, there's been a lot of research about how women bring value to companies, how women, think differently, how we are different, but we actually are better at a lot of things. Can you talk about where we can get some research on to those leaders to educate? And is there research, and maybe MIT could help here, on the ways that women lead differently and better in certain situations?
I'll be quite honest with you. I don't think they want to hear that. I don't think they want to hear how women do things better, right? Because their whole mantra.
From get the data to talk about the education of the value of
Yes, but
improving
yes. I think we have that data. I know the services have done studies. The Coast Guard has a wonderful study on women in the Coast Guard. The Air Force has done it. The Marine Corps has done the value of diversity on teams. So the data is there. Just my personal opinion is I don't think they want to hear why being a woman makes you special. And it's unfortunate, and I don't like it, but I think that's the reality of where we're at. And so I have not come up with, and I think about it a lot, where do we go from there? So how do we ensure that 17% of the force is ready to go out the door and the most lethal and have what they need? Because that's what we are. We're 17% of the force. If we walked away, what would that do to the all-volunteer force? It would decimate it. It would be horrible. We know women are more likely to qualify for service from a recruiting perspective than men right now. That's what the data shows. So I don't have the answer right now because this is like a new problem. But I just don't think that they want to have the conversation of, well, the data says women, bring all these value to the table. I just don't think their ears are open to that right now, unfortunately. But I'm open to being wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
No, I think one of the things you said earlier was you let the dust settle, right? And then you pay attention and figure out a strategic way to go around it, if there is one. But I think you give it a little time, because right now there's a lot of uncertainty and there are a lot of things that are being thrown out there. So I think we let the dust settle a little bit and figure out a path from there.
Think about the words that the CEO used. Meritocracy, lethality, readiness. So women have all of those things too. So we have to have that conversation whether they want to or not. And you're right, it will decimate the force. So they might pick and choose and close down some of the areas that they don't see the value. But that's what we have to talk about. I think she's absolutely right. We have to talk about what we bring, not what we need to be warriors, but we're already warriors. And here's why and what we bring. That's what we have to talk about.
Wonderful. Well, this is the beginning of a conversation, not an end. But I want to thank all of our panelists for their thoughts and perspectives and their time today as well.
Thank you, Sidra.
Thank you.
We'll now take a 10-minute break. Please be back in your seats at 10:37.